I'm honored to introduce John Merrow, one of the most influential education reporters in the nation. John Merrow began his career as an education reporter for NPR in 1974 with the weekly series Options in Education. He served as a host of the Merrow Report, an award-winning documentary series, and currently is an education correspondent for PBS NewsHour. Merrow's report has taken him from the community, colleges to kindergarten classrooms, from the front lines of teacher protests to policy debates on Capitol Hill. His varied reporting has continually been one of the forefront of education journalism. John's latest book, you all have a copy, The Influence of Teachers, Reflections on Teaching and Leadership, was released in February and has been deemed eminently readable, invaluable, and a must-read by our nation's top education leaders. John also maintains a weekly blog, Taking Note, where he has become one of the eminent education voices on the web. To state it simply, without John, the country would not know much about what's really happening in our schools. So please join me in welcoming John Merrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susie. That it is a treat to be at Google. Is this working? Are we good here? No, you want me to speak up? You want? It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Boy, I wanted to talk about a couple of things. Sort of the general theme. Sort of what's wrong with this picture. When I think about American public education, it was Thoreau who said, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." I think he was talking about high school kids. We have not figured out how to make high school a rewarding experience, and as a consequence, we have 6,000 kids leaving, voting with their feet every single school day, more than 1 million young people. And oftentimes that's a defensive and perfectly rational decision because high school is often humiliating for an awful lot of young people. But I don't want to just talk about the stuff that's going wrong. I'd really like to talk about solutions, especially because Google and people like the Google people have it in their capacity to change, to demand changes in the way schools function. And actually, the way I think about it is that, well, there's some of you in this room over the age of 30, perhaps, maybe one or two. But anyone over the age of 30 went to school, and there were essentially 3 justifications for going to school. And today, only one of those 3 applies. And I do write about it in the book. But quickly, when I went to school, or even my children went to school, you had to go there because that's where they kept the knowledge. It was in the books, in the encyclopedias. Remember, they were on a shelf? It was in the head of the teacher. That doesn't apply anymore. I mean, thanks in large part to Google, the internet. It's this constant 24/7 flood of information that our children are swimming in or perhaps drowning in. But information is not knowledge. So you don't have to go to school because the information's there, so therefore you need a different kind of school. You need a school which helps kids sift through this information and turn it into knowledge, maybe even into wisdom. So that you need a school that helps young people separate wheat from chaff. And since we want them to choose the wheat, that means you need schools which are self-consciously aware of their duty to teach values. Second reason that my kids or I was socialization. So the Italian-American kid could learn to get along with the Puerto Rican kid, the boy get along with the girl, so on and so forth. There is an app for that today, a lot of them. And our kids are socializing like crazy. They are on Google Plus and Facebook and Farmville and it's pen pals on steroids. You probably don't know what pen pals are. But, so you need a different kind of school. You need a school because that 14-year-old that your 14-year-old is socializing with might not, in fact, be 14. Might, in fact, be a lot older, might have some nefarious motives. And so kids need to be helped to understand that that stuff that they're sending is more permanent than a tattoo. Just because young people are digital natives does not make them digital citizens. And there's a role for adults in that. The third justification for school for then and now is custodial care. We need a place to send our kids because we're going to work. We want them to be safe, but they are not safe in a school which is only providing custodial care. If it is a school which doesn't understand the technology and a new responsibility for adults, if it's in a school that doesn't understand that it's no longer enough to be an answer factory, then that becomes a dangerous place because kids are smart. They are inventive, they are restless, and they will start using this technology in harmful ways. And there is a lot of that going on. It's called cyberbullying. So we need, one of the reasons I wrote this book is we need a different kind of school. We need a different kind of teacher. There are a number of issues that I'd like to jump around if you don't mind, because there's a lot wrong with this picture. One is that everything else has changed. Schools have changed very little. Schools tend to use technology to control. And so if most of our schools are these answer factories, a kind of regurgitation education, and that turns kids into consumers. They're producing on demand, but they're really just consuming what you fed them and giving it back. That's not what we want our young people to be. We want them to be producers. As I say, you still need the building. We need a place for our kids to go, but there's no reason in God's green earth to respect the walls. Yes, send them the building, but don't respect the walls. Young people in a school here in Mountain View should be, could be, and perhaps are in some of the schools connected to young people in other places, working on projects, creating knowledge. Forgive me, Amanda and Vanessa, because you heard this example. Well, I spoke at the Commonwealth Club last night, and they were in the audience. I now live in New York, having just moved from Palo Alto about a year ago. But looking out the window of our apartment building, I noticed that on each corner there is a large trash receptacle, and our neighborhood's clean. And I was working on a piece for the NewsHour. We were filming up in the South Bronx, and I don't know why I noticed it, but on an intersection there was just one garbage can. I said, okay, well, let's not think of them as garbage cans. And the streets were dirty. So don't think of these as garbage cans. I renamed them Cleanliness Opportunities. So my neighborhood had 4 cleanliness opportunities, and this one in the south. I thought, what a terrific project. Tell the 8th graders to get their smartphones and go to their corner and take the pictures. And then the teachers, those 8th grade teachers in all the middle schools in New York City could do the same thing. And then figure out a way to share that data and do some data analysis and do some thinking about it and some writing about it and maybe get in touch with the mayor. I mean, you're creating knowledge, you're creating trouble, but kids like to do that. But it's positive stuff. I mean, you don't even You can do it at school too. You get a little air quality monitor, which doesn't cost very much. And you go monitor the air quality, and you don't want to take a field trip or can't take a field trip, just walk outside the building. But do it at 9 in the morning, do it at 11, and so on and so forth, and share that data. Maybe you'll find some anomalies. I looked it up the other day. Texas, the great state of Texas, has about 4,000 miles of fast-running water. Fast-running, it's not that sluggish stuff at the border. Why not have the science classes in high schools go to the water? Sample the water, acidity, alkalinity, speed, color, detritus, share the data. And where you find anomalies, gee, the water gets much more acidic right down here, well, let's find out why. I mean, that's a reason to go to school, because you are creating knowledge. And that's the challenge. It's the imperative, I would say. I mean, high school is boring, and it is not producing the kind of young people we need to fuel the economy, to keep the country moving. I know Sandra Day O'Connor spoke here recently and talked about civic illiteracy. Dwight was telling me that, well, you have illiteracy on all the fringes, because we are focusing so deeply and so intensely on basic literacy and numeracy. Now, there are at least 3 literacies that are essential: basic literacy, numeracy, and creativity. But we're so focused on the first 2, we're driving out the third. I feel passionate about this because I don't think we're moving in the right direction. I think we have this collision course, or maybe just ships passing in the night. People who understand what young people need, or even what the economy needs, and yet you have this imperative to get test scores up. And so the narrowing of a curriculum continues. Even though we moan and groan about it, we're still cutting art, music, phys ed, even science. And there's this pressure to say, well, if we get these test scores up, and so some of these test people are saying, well, let's just test in more subjects. If we tested in science, we tested in music, then we'd have to have music. Because, so what you have now, let me use Florida as an example, since it's well known for its evaluation system developed under former Governor Jeb Bush, who is a genuine intellectual and a deep thinker about public education. And on his watch, and even before, they set up something called FCAT, Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test. The state of Florida spends $10,900, call it $11,000 a year per pupil. The FCAT costs $20. So they are using a $20 instrument to measure the efficacy of their $11,000 investment. That's fundamentally insane. And I think of my own car. I drive a used Toyota 4Runner. I think it's a 2002, which cost me $12,000. And I spend $500 a year evaluating it, the equivalent of the FCAT. So I spend $500 for my $12,000 investment. Florida spends $20 for its $11,000 investment. You do the math. And by the way, my evaluation of my car takes 1 day. There are 365 days a year. It takes 1 day. Florida kids go to school 180 days. I have met teachers in Florida who say that they spend between 1/5 and 1/6 of their time on that FCAT. Essentially 1 day a week out of 5-day week, or 1 day out of every 6 days, either prepping for the FCAT, talking about the FCAT, practicing the FCAT, or giving the FCAT. So it's not just that they don't spend money on the evaluation of it. They spend a lot of time. Time is opportunity. Those days are gone. You spend them drilling. You aren't going to spend them doing the other things that you could be doing in school. And what then? Then they take the scores on this cheap test and use it to make judgments about kids, and of course now increasingly about teachers. It is, sort of, when I say what's wrong with this picture, there's that's a major piece of what's wrong with the picture. And the situation has a potential for getting worse because of a digital divide. A growing number of young people do not have access to high speed, to bandwidth. Even if they have the connections, the toys, they don't necessarily have the speed of connection. But access is nowhere near enough because the mindset has to be production. The mindset has to be schools that say that, and educators who ask a fundamental question. Schools say, how intelligent are you? How intelligent are you? How intelligent are you? Let's compare. That's not what we want. What we want, schools would say, how are you intelligent? How are you intelligent? How are you intelligent? And figure that out and create opportunities to maximize that growth. Your kids are smart. And I said before, if they're in schools which are just doing regurgitation education, they're going to use that intelligence probably in bad ways, often in bad ways. So, if the imperative of education is the numeracy, literacy, and creativity, then schools should be saying, how are you creative? How are you creative? How are you creative? And figuring out ways to build that. I mean, there are all these wonderful possibilities that we need to demand it, actually. How many of you have children in school? Okay, so this is probably not, well, it's slightly skewed because there are many young people. But in fact, in the country, only about 20% of households have school-age children. So there's an 80% who do not have an immediate direct interest in public education. Now you start putting in grandchildren, the numbers change a little bit, but there's still a huge number of people who do not have a direct, immediate interest in what's happening in public school. So part of what the school people need to do is figure out how to connect with that 80%. And part of the way you connect with that 80% is when the kids become producers of knowledge, when the work they do reaches that 80%. I'm recruiting teachers now to probably middle school or high school kids to go out in a team and just in their own neighborhood go into stores, the deli, the doorman of the building, the gas station guy, mechanic, somebody at Google, and ask this and frame it, and just shooting on video, frame it the same way each time and ask the person to recite a couple of lines from a poem. You want the 80%. You don't want, you got a kid in school, you're disqualified. You want someone who doesn't have a kid in school, okay. And you create a montage of he's saying to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is noble in the mind's eye and so on. All the way through, you stitch it together and you put it up on YouTube. And those 12 people who don't have kids in school are going to say, hey, do you see what they're doing in school? And by the way, did you see me? So you're going to build an audience. I mean, it's a drip, drip, drip thing. But suppose in every community, 4 or 5 teachers did that in different parts of the town. You'd have people saying, wow. And of course, the kids would they'd be creating something. The kids would be learning a real set of skills. It's not easy to get people to relax and look into the camera and say the lines. And it's a whole set, and then of course you have to do the editing. So there's a whole set of skills for the kid. And there is the thrill of production. There's the ownership. Marx had it right about folks being separated from the fruits of their labor. Very few people get to do what Amanda and I do, which is start something here and go all the way through the end. And that's the opportunity that we want our kids, we should want our kids to have. It's why they thrive in extracurricular stuff, because they own it. Let me say, defining the problem. Now, this general heading is what's wrong with this picture. A big thing is wrong with the picture is how we define the problem. When we talk about public education, that I would say that it's not that we have aimed too high and failed. We've aimed too low, and we have succeeded. We simply do not ask enough of our young people, but we don't ask the right kinds of stuff. Educators talk about rigor. We need more rigorous education. And nobody has ever looked that word up, apparently. You know about rigor mortis? Connect the dots. Rigor means harsh, yielding, rigorous, harsh, yielding, painful. And that's an adult mindset about what education is supposed to be. It's not. It's totally wrong. It should say challenging. But you can't even break them of that habit, which unfortunately is very revealing. As they say, we've aimed too low and we've succeeded. The second huge, sort of what's wrong with this picture is the achievement gap. Can somebody define the achievement gap for me? Oh, go ahead. What's the achievement gap? Who's the gap between? Rich and the poor, actually not, usually. Yeah. I'm sorry? Yes, it's in terms of race. It's in terms of white kids versus black kids or black and Hispanic kids. I'm not sure if it occurs to anyone that in itself could be something of a racist construct. If we could only get these kids who aren't white to do as well as the whites do. And I tend to think of that because so my way of playing with that idea, often what we do is we have an achievement gap between white kids and non-white kids. We can just get these kids so the focus in school is often on the test scores, which is the output. There's not much conversation about a couple of other gaps: a gap in opportunity, a gap in expectations, sometimes a gap in leadership. But if you have at least two of those three, often you'll have an outcome gap. But if you only focus on the outcomes, then you end up drilling those kids. There's a well-known vocabulary gap when young people start preschool or kindergarten. The number of words is, people argue about whether it's 3 million or 30 million more words that the middle class or upper middle class white kid has heard than the poor kid. But if you're only focusing on the vocabulary gap, what will happen in poor schools is they're thought drilling kids on vocabulary. Well, that's not how those white kids learned the words. They learned them in conversations. They learned them by using words in social, in family kinds of, but schools with their focus just on the outcome, which is what's going to be tested, they subvert the process and make it painful. I often say that what we really should talk about is the Asian-white achievement gap. We say, my God, will you look at this Asian-white achievement gap? We got to do something. These white kids are way behind. We got to start drilling the white kids. Let's eliminate recess for the white kids. Let's get rid of art and music for the white kid. I mean, I hope that suggests the absurdity of it. So, I mean, that would be one of the ways of thinking about what we need to do in public education. I'm making it sound very bleak, and I don't mean to. I'd actually like to show you a little clip of what we're working on now. But part of our problem is an absorption, a fascination with magic bullets or silver bullets. This will do it. If we just could bring in Teach for America, everything would be fine. Just if we could just have charter schools or vouchers or some one thing. The New Orleans in August 2005 was virtually destroyed by Hurricane Katrina and the subsequent flooding when the levees broke. The school system, we started reporting from there not long after that, and in fact just finished filming in November, October maybe. So really 6 years. We have 6 years worth of video that we're now editing into a documentary, a film, we hope, if we get lucky and raise enough money to finish it that way. And it's a remarkable story. And if, with your permission, I'll show you a little bit of In the fall of 2005, 6 weeks after Hurricane Katrina made landfall, I arrived in New Orleans. I think I saw you in the paper. It said, God answered my prayers.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a particularly religious person. That's just one of my asides. No, God didn't answer my prayers. I think that we got lucky.
We got lucky.
Yeah.
I was in New Orleans to report on the city's beleaguered public school system for the PBS NewsHour. All but a handful of the schools had sustained incredible damage. 60,000 students were displaced, many homeless, their teachers scattered across the nation. And in the midst of this great tragedy, an unexpected sentiment had emerged.
The storm has come through and done the damage. Look at what we can take from that, what we can use it for. It's a tool.
For those who had been championing drastic reform, the opportunity was irresistible. Hurricane Katrina had shut down the city of New Orleans, and with it, its schools, long considered among the worst in the nation. The greatest experiment in the history of American public education was about to begin.
Just powerful. I just feel so honored, it's just an honor to be here at this point in time, to be part of this new beginnings.
December 14th, 2005. Much of the city is still deserted. In less than 24 hours, public school will reopen. No one is sure how many students to expect. Here at O. Perry Walker High School, the pressure is on.
Hopefully never, ever again in the history of this country, and I venture in the world, will any group of folk be given an opportunity because of a Katrina or some other natural disaster. But the reality is we have this opportunity, and we need to seize this moment.
We have to be on our toes when the kids come in. And you set the stage. We all know that from teaching. If you've taught 1 month, you know that the first day sets the stage.
Some of us as teachers, we're going to want to go back the way it was done before. A lot of the children, going to be expecting things to look like they did before. and it's just going to be interesting how we can create a new vision of who we are and what we want to be.
Business as usual was out the door. Walker was reopening as a public charter school. It would be independent of the local school board for 4 years. If it didn't prove its worth during that time, it would be closed.
We were slaves to the old system, but the shackles have been removed from us. So now we are free. We are free to do the things that we need to do as teachers to educate. I feel free.
The raging river whose waters destroyed New Orleans begins here, 1,400 miles away in northern Minnesota. And it's here, at the Mississippi River's source, that charter schools, which would play a vital part in the rebirth of New Orleans, were born. It was at a meeting in 1988. The driving force was labor union leader Albert Shanker.
I believe very strongly that what you need to do is give the professionals in the school the right to run the school. Stop telling them what to do.
What Shanker was proposing was unheard of. Most of the country's 100,000 public schools were run from central offices, top down. Shanker wanted to give control to teachers and to principals, who rarely got to decide whom to hire or fire or how to spend money.
Set the goals for them and tell them what you're going to measure 5 years from now. And at the end of that period of time, there ought to be real rewards and real punishments. There ought to be real consequences for making it or not making it.
Look up here.
Shanker and others hoped that every school district would create at least one charter school as a laboratory for other schools to learn from. But the idea of giving power to individual schools was vigorously opposed by school boards. Many states passed laws banning charter schools or limiting their numbers. By 2004, the country's 15,000 school districts had opened only 3,000 charter schools. Charter schools were marginal at best. Then came Katrina.
I went into the city in October, and you felt like you were in a Hitchcock movie. It was like a smart bomb had gone off. It was buildings, there were no people, there were no birds, there were no animals, there were no signs of movement. Schools are shuttered. The city is shuttered. I think there was the strong belief at that point in time that with the schools shuttered and the opportunity to start it over again, we were going to take advantage of that and do a much better job.
Everyone in New Orleans wants the same things: safe streets, good jobs, better schools.
Insurance executive and recent mayoral candidate Leslie Jacobs served on the Orleans Parish School Board for 4 years.
It's probably the most frustrating experience I've ever had in my life. I work 30, 40 hours a week, every week, not paid. I accomplished nothing. The valedictorian of one of our high schools could not walk across the stage and get her diploma because she failed the graduation exit exam in math 7 times.
It was kind of this poisonous environment. I felt there was a very toxic environment in education in New Orleans before Katrina.
At the time, Aisha Rashid was the education reporter for the Times-Picayune.
I think that there were many good teachers, but when you're constantly labeled as failing and you are supposed to be failing, I think the adults start to carry that feeling of failure too.
The problems weren't just academic. In the district's central office, corruption was rampant. 24 school employees had been indicted on fraud charges. 71 million federal dollars were unaccounted for. New Orleans public schools were on the verge of bankruptcy.
I remember thinking, like, how you to resolve this depth of corruption, this depth of disenfranchisement, these deep feelings of inadequacy, like, how do you resolve that in a system that has to keep going? And so I used to think that, like, if only there could just be, like, you know, a few months where there was just no school, right? And then Katrina happens, right? And you're kind of like, well, there you go.
In November 2005, with most New Orleanians still displaced, lawmakers in Baton Rouge took action.
The House and Senate voted late yesterday to approve Louisiana Governor Kathleen Blanco's proposal for the state to take over schools in New Orleans.
In an unprecedented move, the state seized control of 100 of New Orleans' worst schools, 90% of the entire district. Their challenge was immense. Some people have said, well, Katrina was in some way a blessing. You know,
Let me tell you something. If you looked into the eyes of children who've been through that, you would never say that.
And what is your name, sir?
Kelvin
Naka?
Kids don't see it that way. Anybody who works with children knows damn well Katrina was not a blessing in any way, shape, form, or fashion. You know, I had to leave my dog behind. You know, I left my teddy bear behind. I left my room behind, my games behind, my friends behind, my grandmama behind.
In spite of the obstacles, the ambitious plan was for the state to fix the schools. Leslie Jacobs was skeptical.
I'm still not convinced today that a Department of Ed has the capacity to run schools. That's really not what State Department of Eds are set up to do.
But Jacobs, then on the State Board of Education, did not want the local school board to run the show either. She saw a way to take care of both problems, give the power to the schools.
I do not believe charter schools are a silver bullet, period. But if you're a good school leader and you have the freedom of a charter school, you're going to run a good to great school.
In New Orleans, charter schools were not going to be competing with the traditional public school system. The goal was for them to replace that system. As students returned to O. Perry Walker for the first day of class since Katrina, Principal Laurie made sure they understood this was the start of something new.
You guys know that we're now charter school versus New Orleans public schools. You all know that. Okay. And what that means is that we're no longer under the governance structure of New Orleans public schools. This is now the Algiers Charter School Association. And so what they did...
6 years later, New Orleans is still rebuilding. The school system that once had 60,000 students is now a system of schools, 75% of them charter schools, with 40,000 students. Academic performance has improved every year, but transforming the Big Easy has been anything but. That's the rough first 10 minutes of the film that we're working on now, and it's a remarkable story. It's a story of what's possible. They're still test score driven. I don't think they're asking that question, how are you intelligent? But they're getting there. And it's a story of what's possible, and by golly, it's a story that California needs to watch, needs to be aware of, because this is an incredibly, fill in your own adjective, state when it comes to public education. I did a documentary in 2005, a history of public education in California called First to Worst, and sad to say, we could do a sequel if there were another word that's more superlative than worst. That first to, or worst to even worse. The rich-poor gap has grown. The funding is still pretty screwed up with about, 400 of the state's 1,000 school districts having private foundations. That create a kind of quasi-public-private system. But our hope is that that film, have any of you seen a film called Waiting for Superman? Yeah, well, my hope is that we'll undo some of the damage that what to me was a well-made propaganda film, will undo some of that damage. We're working on a second documentary in addition to our work for PBS, about a woman named Michelle Rhee, who was the chancellor in, people are nodding their heads, she's a Californian or a half-time Californian now. She's married to the mayor of Sacramento. But she was chancellor in Washington, D.C. For 3 years plus, and we followed her on the NewsHour. And if you saw Waiting for Superman, there's a scene where she fires somebody. That's our footage. We had a bit of a legal squabble with the producer of Waiting for Superman about that. Basically, they wanted to use it without paying for it. And we had to threaten to sue, and they caved when I threatened to boycott the Hollywood premiere in my underwear, and they wrote us a big check at that point. But it wasn't much fun. But anyway, there's a documentary about Michelle Rhee that's coming as well. Well, let me see if there's anything you would like to ask or say. And I guess you want the microphone. So maybe would you say your name and... Yeah.
Sure, I'm Harvey Alcabez, and near the end of that clip, it said that almost all, or 75% of the schools were run by private foundations. Is
Well,
that
private, they're charter schools. They're run by charter operators. They're not for-profit.
Okay, that was the clarification I was looking for.
There actually are no for-profit charter schools there. There's one that has a connection to a for-profit operator. But and what New Orleans did, because you've seen the research about charter schools, and you know that a lot of them are no better than regular public schools. They are public schools, but what New Orleans did, even though it was desperate to open schools, it turned down most of the people who asked for a charter, who applied for a charter. They had about 50 applicants. They probably needed 20 schools. They only approved 6 charters. And by setting that bar very high at the beginning, that didn't guarantee outcomes, but it certainly made it much more likely that they'd be successful. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Devin, and I have 2 questions. One is, what do you think the barriers are? I perceive one as being the fact that a lot of the teachers aren't prepared to utilize all the media, all the technology that we have available right now. And also, what do you think about testing? Do you think it's possible to create the tests that would allow us to teach the way we'd like to, or do you think those need to be generated?
Those are two terrific questions. Let me take the second one first about testing. The answer is yes, there are good tests. There's a program called the International Baccalaureate, which has a challenging curriculum and tests that are built to test that curriculum. The flaw is that we use cheap tests. A company named Hart's, which makes flea powder and kitty litter, spends more money testing its products than we spend testing what our children have learned. I mean, that Florida example is probably not an outlier, $20 on an $11,000 investment. But sure, you can have good tests. We are in the process now of developing national tests. There's something called a Common Core curriculum, and there are people trying to develop tests. My feeling, and by the way, they're having trouble finding the psychometricians because they're all working for Hart's, or Toyota or somewhere else where they take testing the products very carefully. But my hunch is that you could develop, for example, an exam in physics, and you wouldn't have to develop a new one each year. If you said these are the 5 aspects of physics, and you get here are 100 good questions in this aspect here, and just change the numbers, so you can't teach each of the problems, and release the whole test, release all 3,000 items, and say the national physics test this year is going to be 30 of these questions. Nobody's going to, and you just change the numbers. I mean, you could do something like that, so you wouldn't have to spend a ton of money developing new tests every year, and you could have really good tests. Barriers to using the technology. There are several. I don't think everyone talks about the teachers and their technological illiteracy or their fear, and I think those are real. I think a larger barrier is the adult need for control. And they've gone through, you all probably know more about this than I'm sure you do know more about this than I do, the notion of a walled garden to keep kids from going off and looking at porn or whatever. And there's some challenges there. My wife was head of a girls' school in Palo Alto for many years, and she would not allow laptops because she felt that when you put this guy up, you're creating a barrier. And she was actually, Steve Jobs was one of the parents, and she said to him, when there's a tablet, we're okay with it. But, and if you ever have been in a college classroom, been in the back of the room while somebody is up in front lecturing and everybody has their laptops open, they're doing all kinds of stuff. But the barrier, yes, teachers need some help, but of course they can get the help from the kids. I mean, the kids are these digital natives. If they can let go. But a larger part is that schools tend to use the technology for control, to get information, instead of this idea of creating. And so you have to change a mindset which says, yeah, we're going to be in the building, but we're not going to respect the walls. Yes, we're going to do real projects that are real work. That the idea of using technology as a better way to get kids to regurgitate is profoundly offensive. There was a piece in the Times about how some school, they were using the clickers to give true-false questions. I mean, that they've invested money to buy these robot things. It's insane, and it's a combination of, I think, ignorance and fear on the part of the adults. Yeah, yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Hubert Chen, a software engineer here and graduate of the International Baccalaureate program. So I'm wondering, there's a book called Freakonomics and another book called Super Freakonomics in which the authors talked about education a bit. So I'm wondering whether you've read it and what you think about it. Specifically, they gave 2 points. One point is that the achievement gap may not so much be the result of going to good schools versus bad schools, but it may be the attitude of the children's parents. Like in black communities, doing well in school is sort of considered to be acting white, like there are negative consequences of that for those children. And secondly, they also made a point that because of the feminine movement, right now compared to, let's say, 40 years ago, let's say the IQ and the quality of teachers have decreased a lot, because it used to be that a lot of smart women were teachers and now they're taking other jobs, leaving less smart people to become teachers.
Two sort of complicated thoughts. I may have to ask you to remind me of the first one again, but on the notion of the teaching force, there's no question that the composition of the classroom has changed. It used to be that there were very few jobs for talented women other than teaching and a few others. And so schools were filled with capable, smart, and so on. And we had a system then where we trusted the teacher. And go to your parents. My mom saved all my report cards, bless her heart. And when I was an adult, gave me the report cards, and by then I had children of my own. And and of course I looked at them, which was a huge mistake. But one thing I noticed was that in my elementary school report cards, there was a block about this big for the teacher to write comments. Johnny's doing such and running with scissors, whatever. And then with my children, my older son who's now 43, it was smaller. By the time my youngest, there was virtually no comment. There was a couple of check places where they'd say, does this or that. What I inferred from that is we were moving from a system of trust to a place where we really didn't care what the teacher said because we didn't trust the teacher. And now we're all about verifying. We're going to measure how you do on the test, and then we're going to draw some conclusions about your teacher. So we moved from trust to verify. And it was Ronald Reagan who said, when talking about the Soviet Union, trust but verify. And that's really what you need in education. You need a system which trusts teachers. We have this big argument going on in this country defining the problem. Is the problem we don't have enough good people in the classroom teaching our children? Or is the problem that it's a crummy job? If you're a teacher, you cannot get up and say, you know, I need to use the bathroom. You just can't do it. I mean, you can't make a phone call. I mean, you don't get to spend time with your colleagues. You don't have a 20% rule or anything approaching that. American teachers spend more time in front of their children than do teachers in countries that are eating us for lunch, like Finland and South Korea. Their teachers are expected to be able to watch each other and to collaborate and talk about our kids. How's Charlie doing in your class? So there's a respect for the profession. So the argument is, do we need better people, or we have to make it a better job? Now the better people are, you know, Teach for America, Waiting for Superman. If we could just get rid of those bottom 10%. And next year there'll be a new bottom 10%. And the better job people say, no, you need to change the working conditions. Pay is a problem. Teacher pay has not moved very much in 40 years. 40 years ago, the average teacher made about $49,000, adjusted for inflation. Today, it's $55,000. That's a raise of $140 a year. I forget I did the percentages, but I've forgotten them now. $140 a year, every year for 40 years. But it's not the pay that teachers talk about when they're polled. They want a chance to collaborate, to do what we do in our work. We don't allow that to happen. So my hunch is, and it's the argument of this book, is that it's a big argument, but it's irrelevant to the needs of kids. You know, this adult sparring is irrelevant because, as I said at the beginning, the conditions have changed for kids in terms of school. But if you made it a better job, you would, by definition, it would be more appealing. As you may know, 40% of first-year teachers leave the profession in 5 years. That's a huge drain. And the human capital costs of bringing in new people are huge as well. It's not a rewarding profession in the sense you have to teach for 20 years before you start having some real investment. There are people who are saying, no, you should pay new teachers more at the beginning and forget these pensions, do an IRA, give them some responsibility there. And you can change that structure and bring in different people. But that would be a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. Acting white in the family, I'm probably an outlier on this because I think educators, the education profession has an arrogance about it that is entirely undeserved. And that is their attitude, their implicit, and they're hardly ever stated, is just leave your kids at the door. Oh, leave the money, leave your kids at the door and we'll educate them. And that ain't the way it works. The parents are the principal educators of a child. Whatever else happens, your child's going to learn more from you as his mother or father, her mother or father, than from a teacher. And so schools should capitalize on that, in my view, and in an organic way. And if I were a school superintendent, which I never will be, but and I once was, well, it's a long story. I would say in first grade and kindergarten, the teacher should say once a week to the class, have an assignment which the parents are a part of. Kindergarten, go home and ask your mom or your dad, your grandma, your guardian, what was the first movie they remember seeing? And come tell the class about it. Go shopping and get the price of this and that, soup and crackers, and come tell ask your mom about the first trip she ever took. And you're in second grade now, and so write a little paragraph about it. Interview your dad about the first movie he ever saw, his favorite food. any ordinary humdrum stuff, you know the parent is going to want to read what her child wrote. And it's going to want to read what the teacher said about. And so it's not this parent involvement committees that schools set up. This is just in the thing. It's in the fabric. And then you don't get this distinction between doing well in school as acting white. Rather, it just becomes part of what you do, and it doesn't have to stop in elementary school. I mean, they can figure out ways to keep it going. But it has to be in the DNA of the education folks to say, we know we're in this together. See, the job of school is not to teach children. The job of school is to help grow adults. And they can't do that by themselves, nor should they ever try. But if they say, well, my job is to teach, you got it wrong from the get-go. You say, our job is to help grow adults. And by the way, what kind of adults do we want? What do we want listen, don't give up. Okay, come on up. So, I think there's a way to get around that, but it is a real problem. Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I was wondering, what were your thoughts on studio schools, thoughts and feelings? And second, it seems that we really want to evaluate students in a scalable manner, so be able to test them quickly and efficiently. But your idea of wanting to evaluate each kid on what their intelligence is seems kind of like a case-by-case evaluation basis.
Yes.
Do you think, do we have to break that idea of wanting to scale testing to be able to actually have good teaching, or how do you balance those two?
Oh, wow, good question. You have to tell me about studio schools.
Oh, sorry. So there was a TED Talk about studio schools. These schools where work is very project based. They're running pilot programs in London. I think it is, or somewhere in England. And
So it is. Can I talk about project-based learning instead? I mean, is that the? Yeah. I wholeheartedly endorse that as a concept. I mean, that's really what should be going on. But it goes back to a journalism school where you're producing a newspaper, a magazine, a radio show. That's project-based learning. That's when you're in drama, you're doing a play. It's the kind of stuff that keeps kids in school when they get to do things like that. I think that we need much more of that. It's my quarrel with things like the Khan Academy, which in many ways is terrific, but my quarrel is that it's isolating and it is acquisition of knowledge, which is important, but you need to go beyond that, where you use that knowledge to create more knowledge and where you work with other people. So the more project-based learning, the better. In terms of the scalability of testing, I think you need both. You need something like our National Assessment of Educational Progress, which, by the way, doesn't test every kid, samples and measures the health of a district or the health of a school and is reliable. But what you want is, if you're trusting teachers and the teacher is saying, how are you intelligent, how can we build on that, then there's much more attention to you, and there's much more trust of what I, as your teacher, say about how, and there's some work that you've done, because it's real work. Yeah, it's more complicated. It's more expensive than $20. Yeah, I think I'm going over time here, and I don't want to keep you from, but I do very much appreciate the opportunity to talk about what I've been doing for 35 years now, and hopefully for a few more years anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John.